until we get to the next part. So,
okay, guys. So my name is Josh. I'm part of the marketing team here at PKI Solutions. The title of this webinar is Deadlines, Impact, and Actions, Certificate-Based Authentication Changes. And again, as Sean mentioned, some of you are going to be hearing this part of this webinar as if it's deja vu. You are not in the matrix. You are literally hearing the same information because we wanted to accommodate some folks that had been waiting because they got an earlier invite. So without further ado, we're going to go right into this. We have, Sean, why don't you just real quick, since it is 10:31, give an elevator view of who you are at PKI Solutions.
Yeah, so again, I'm Sean Rayborn. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at PKI Solutions. I deal with both the consulting side of the house with our professional services business, as well as the development side of our house with PKI Spotlight. And today we're going to talk about Microsoft KB5014754 and some of the deadlines that are coming up with regard to that update. So I'm going to go ahead and move us forward. So we're going to have for the people that attended, we're going to go through and have some polls, and the people that showed up and answered the polls, we're going to go through and select a couple of winners. It's truly a very random process to select the winners. It's actually kind of a fun thing that we do around the office. It's like a spin the wheel type deal, and we have some swag that we're going to give away. We mailed some out for the last one very recently, so we're just just giving some more away. Man, I tell you what, these coffee cups and these water bottles, really nice stuff. We'll mail that stuff right to you.
Let me jump in here real quick too, Sean. So the rules for this particular webinar are that you needed to respond to this poll question on PKI Solutions profile on LinkedIn correctly. And then you also needed to attend this webinar. And so at the end of the webinar, we'll cross-reference the attendees versus the correct poll responders. We'll set up a Wheel of Fortune on a computer screen, and we'll pick 3 in a very unscientific manner. And we're all jealous about these mugs because we don't get them, you get them. We have to do something spectacular to get them. They're just for our winners. And we'll also announce who the winners are socially as well. Going forward, at least for the next webinar, maybe some after that, a requirement will be that you need to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn, because we're really trying to use both of those channels for outreach, and they're really going to help craft the direction of our future polls, which we're using to guide some industry publications that we're working on internally. And then also, they help kind of craft the direction that we go in as a company to one degree or another. So that being said, those are going to be the requirements in the future. And Sean, I'll hand it back over.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about that stuff. For the folks that are just joining us, and kind of reiterating for anybody that may have joined early because of the separate invite, we're going to cover what is Microsoft KB5014754. What's the impact of the update? Some of the timelines and deadlines that are going to be part of that update. Some of the considerations that you'll need to think about when we talk about this update, and then some open Q&A. We've already started to I already saw one really good question come in to the Q&A, and I think we may actually address it in the slides. But keep the questions coming. We got folks that are going to try to answer the questions in real time, and we'll also try to answer them in real time. You've got me until 11:30 Pacific, so we got another 55 minutes. I can tell you right now, we do not have 55 minutes worth of slides. So if we get to the end and we're getting a lot of folks in here, and you want to ask questions about other stuff, by all means, let's get that going. we also have a couple things coming up that we can talk about in advance of the stuff that's coming down the pipe. So that said, so what is Microsoft KB5014754? It is a update release that happened in May of 2022. So let's just doing the math, that's 9 months ago. So there's a really good chance that you already have the update. It's already installed. And what it did was it addressed an elevation of privilege and actually multiple elevation of privilege and spoofing vulnerabilities across Windows Server OS builds. It impacts how certificates used for authentication are mapped back to account principals. In short, one of the bigger things that it helped to resolve is that the $sign that's at the end of a computer account was not being considered, there was a situation where if you had a computer account that would get a certificate and you could export that computer account and you could rename your own user account to be able to use that computer account's name, you could actually spoof that computer account. It could be used as a spoof or a man in the middle. That's just one in short way that you could have exploited that. So right now, before we go into a little bit more details, we'll go into the first poll.
Yeah, so I've got that queued up here, and it should just appear on your screen. I'm not going to go into a lot of superfluous explanation on this. I just want you to see it and answer it from the gut, and that's going to be the case with all of these. So I'll go ahead and post that now. And let's see.
So the poll question I've got is in your cybersecurity role, which are you most concerned about? A, not passing an audit, which that's a pretty big concern. A data breach, that's also a pretty big concern. C would be losing cyber insurance coverage, which, again, that would be another big concern. Or other, which is common. So I'm going to answer this one as well, if it'll let me.
Yeah, so Sean likes to do this. Sean likes to take our metrics and mess them all up by voting. So we have to systematically go through and remove his votes, but they're usually funny.
So I can tell you, as somebody who's been in, I've been in roles where I've had to report to a CISO, or I've been in a role, It's a mixed bag, right? Because if you are somebody that is close to the money, your priorities might be a little bit different than if you are somebody that's close to the end user. And in a lot of circumstances, the people that are close to the money are not necessarily the people that are close to the end users. And that presents itself as a problem because the real problems occur where the end users live. And there are several layers of obfuscation between the end user and the director, the decision maker. Typically, a lot of the budget decisions are based on okay, well, we have requirements, we have things that we have to do, and security components. Security is expensive. It doesn't make you any money in most circumstances. It only costs you money, and really, you don't realize the benefits of something like that until it's too late, until you're already breached and you're recovering, or it's very hard to quantify. Okay, well, we blocked an attacker, and we don't know how much that would have cost. Right? It's a very difficult conversation to have. So that's why that's an interesting poll question in my mind, because depending on who you are and what your role is, your answer may be potentially different. So I like that question. So what is the impact of that update? So what happens is as soon as you install that update, which hopefully that was in May, I'm looking at all you guys saying, hopefully that was in May and not in, now. ADCS Enterprise CAs include a non-critical OID for strong user mapping for certificate templates. That's your 1361, blah, blah, blah. And, your MS PKI enrollment flag 0x8 0000. There's actually supposed to be 4 zeros there. And what that does is that it provides a means for the user SID to be mapped into that certificate. It happens kind of transparently, kind of behind the scenes. If you got a template that qualifies, it's going to go ahead and pop that in. If you don't have it popped in, you just bump that enrollment flag using CertUtil or whatever your favorite tool is, and it'll include that OID, and you'll be good and fine and ready to go. Now, that's for stuff that was post that update. There are situations where you may have issued a whole bunch of stuff before that update, there are several situations that you potentially could catch yourself in, and that's where these registry entries that were introduced are very interesting. The first one is strong certificate binding enforcement. So the first one that lays down as soon as that update comes in, and it's basically sitting there, it's on by default, where, okay, we're going to disable each other. We're not going to do anything, but we're going to introduce new events. We're going to let you know, hey, there could have been an issue here. You set that enforcement to 1. We're going to check for it. We're going to say, okay, we want a strong mapping. Depending on how that strong mapping happens, we'll talk about that in a little bit later slide. We're going to let it happen if the user account was created before the certificate was created, and we'll still let you know in the event logs. And then setting it to 2 is basically, all right, we need strong mapping. We're going to check it. We're going to make sure that everything's good. We're going to make sure that it maps back, that it uses a valid mapping method, and everything's good to go. This is on the domain controller, it's a KDC setting. On the TLS server, so anything that's receiving a TLS request using S-channel, very important. If you're using OpenSSL or something like that, then the way that works is probably going to be different. But if you're using just S-channel on Windows, you have certificate mapping methods, and this bitmask is if you have it to 0x18, it'll be all right. We're going to have the strong mappings enforced, and it's actually 2 different bitmasks. It's an 8 or a, I believe, yeah, it's an 8 and a 10. So, or an 8 and I guess it'd be a hex 10. And it basically said, okay, we're going to have the S4U2 self strong mappings enforced. If you add bitmasks for 1, 2, or 4, it'll add the weak mappings. We'll talk about that in one of the next slides. And then if you are in a situation where you have certificate backdating, or the certificate predates the user account on the domain controller or the KDC, you can actually back up a value. You can put a value in seconds that will back up and allow for certificates that were issued before the user account was created. And that value is in seconds, so you can set it to 50 years if you wanted to. I think in the chat we had a use case where, all right, well, we might have had it created 10 minutes before the user account, or half an hour before the user account, or whatever. Or it could be a situation where user account was created and the certificate was issued or at the same time, but there may have been a clock skew and the certificate ends up showing up beforehand. You can account for that if it was something that happens in near real time. In a lot of circumstances, the user is going to create the certificate, and it's probably a setting that 99% of people are going to need to not worry about as much, but it's there if you need it. So a couple of timeline deadlines coming up, right? So the original release was May 10th, 2022, and that's a long time ago. That was 9 months ago. I tell you where I was that day, and it was on the other side of the country. I've since lived 4 different places and moved across the country. That is a long time ago. Hopefully you guys installed that stuff on that Tuesday, and if not, the night of that Tuesday. It'd be interesting to see in the chat, how fast do you guys patch when these big releases come out? You guys patch as soon as they happen, or do you guys patch a week later, or do you wait for stuff to break in everybody else's environments before you patch? be interested in hearing, what you guys do, what kind of stagger you guys have, just more as an academic exercise. But May 10th is when it came out. Disabled mode, so that it was that registry key for strong enforcement. If you just having it at 0 is disabled mode, that's going away. April 11th. That is less than 2 months. That is 8 weeks away. Luckily, it is 8 weeks away. Actually, the deadline for that was supposed to be yesterday. Microsoft killed off Internet Explorer. Rest in peace. Pour one out for the homie. And I think they may have, I don't know, they may have just said, hey, we have way too many deadlines happening on Valentine's Day. In the sake of love, we're going to go ahead and bump this one out. So April 11th, disabled mode is going to be removed. And then November, right before the holidays, full enforcement mode. So that basically would be like strong enforcement set to 2. That's going to kick in November 14th. So you got to be ready. Stuff's going to break. Stuff's going to break if you aren't ready for it. If you're not accounting for it. Now, luckily, the presence of this update will introduce new events, which we'll talk about after the poll, the second poll.
Okay, guys. So I'm starting the second poll again. I'm not going to go into a lot of explanation. I'm just going to start it. It's going to be based on the first poll. So I'm going to read the first poll to you after I post this poll, all right? So you should see the poll now, right? Now, go ahead and start answering if you remember what the first poll was. I'll read you the initial poll. In your cybersecurity role, which are you most concerned about? And then there were 4 questions you could choose from. Not passing an audit, a data breach, losing cyber insurance coverage, or other. And then you have the option to add it in chat. So go ahead and answer this, and we'll keep moving. You should be able to answer this in your own time.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, there's always, what is your concern? What keeps you up at night? And then there's how much time you actually spend on it. And in some circumstances, those are actually, those are data points that usually one would think that, your biggest concern, you'd spend a lot of time on it, but in a lot of circumstances, you may just be overwhelmed, and it may be something that is not in your purview, or maybe something that you just don't have time for or awareness of. Couple of interesting statistics that I've heard. Now, whether or not they're true or not, I'll leave it up to you, but I'm pretty sure they're pretty darn true. So the first one is it was a statistic that came in from my former employer, and it was a couple of years ago, but I imagine that the number is probably very close to still the same. That statistic was that 70% of the calls that they got in for their emergency, their disaster recovery lines, if you're exploited or breached, you call and it's, hey, we're going to do that. 70% of the calls that came in were ransomware. So if 70% of the actual attacks that are perpetuated and reported are ransomware, then there's a pretty good chance that number is actually a lot higher. And, some of those concerns, those breach concerns may not necessarily be what we would think of in exfiltration or data loss or something like that. It's just access to the data in general and it being held for ransom, right? So that is kind of a loaded poll question, in my opinion, because data breach can mean so many different things. That's just one example. I mean, we could go into the other things, but another interesting stat that may skew that data to think about is was reading between 700 and 800 developers for every one IT security person. So if you think about that for a minute, you think about where the world's going in terms of their computing and the way that perceived computing is happening, that if there's 700 developers for every one IT security person, where are those decisions being made? Are they happening in the IT security organization, or are the developers making executive decisions at that point? Hopefully that the security conscious org is doing that and not developers just guessing. All right, so a couple of considerations, a couple of questions based on the timelines and everything. So do we need to issue certificates? And I'm going to give the answer that my boss loves to give, Mark Cooper. He says it depends. It's the classic consultant answer. But I think in short, it's, do you meet the use cases? The biggest use case being TLS with mutual authentication. So, and that's, in a lot of enterprises, that is a internal use case. It is okay, we want to have some sort of a seamless sign-in functionality. We need to have some sort of a way to identify the user that's above and beyond username and password, or that's above and beyond, just taking your word that it's somebody that's trustworthy. So we'll flip on, all right, we're going to flip on the mutual authentication bits. Not only are we going to test out the certificate that goes to the server, we're also going to test out the certificate that goes to the client. And in that scenario, it's going to go through and verify the client certificate, the client user certificate, to make sure that the user is who they say they are. The way to do this in the past, a way to do this in the past is with mapping to an attribute called alt security identities. And basically what that is it's an attribute on a user account, it's a string attribute, and you can go through and specify additional ways to identify that user. And there are a bunch of different mapping types, and I allude to it a little bit later in the slide, which is, you have your weak mappings, which is things that can be changed, right? Things that are adjustments, that adjustments to the user can throw them out of whack. Like, for instance, your SAM account name. So that's your, 8-digit logon string, or 8-character logon string. Or I guess it would be more than 8 now, 15. And then you have your user principal name, which is, your front label at whatever your domain label is. Those aren't unique and exclusive. So you are in situations where that potentially could have a conflict and throw things off. If you look at the weak mappings, the first one is X509 issuer, so we know that it's coming from the CA that we specify, and then the subject name. Subject name is something that's completely not necessarily objectified. You can actually have settings where you can set the subject to wherever you want it to set. Poor configuration would throw you into a situation where you could authenticate as somebody else. Same thing with just subject only. That's even more dangerous. That's just saying, okay, well, we just trust that CA is going to put the right subject name in there, and we're going to be good. X509 RFC 822 is, if the email name matches the email, we're good. Well, you can change an email. That's a weak mapping. So there's the strong mappings, which is issuer to the serial number. That's saying, okay, not only are we going to have it to where we specify the issuer of the CA, we're also going to say the serial number for certificate that we've identified for authentication is here. And that is recommended. That is a recommended practice. So if you know the certificate that you're going to use for mutual authentication for that particular user, then you would pop this, and this would be the recommended strong mapping that you would use. Subject key identifier and SHA-1 public key are also strong mappings. The recommended mapping for this would be issuer serial number. This is if you're in a situation where that OID can't be populated by the SID. So next question, we have, what might break? If you've applied the update, you're going to get events. So you have 39, 40, and 41. If you're running legacy versions of Windows, it's actually going to be 41, 48, 49. Event ID 39 is, okay, our strong mapping failed. We're letting you know. We had a client authentication certificate that got presented. The strong mapping failed. If you have it disabled, it's going to let it through. It's going to say, okay, we're going to let it through, but we're just going to pop that event. Event ID 40 basically, okay, well, we saw this, there was a mutual authentication, but the certificate was issued before the user was created. We're letting you know. And then event ID 41 is, okay, well, we actually detected there is a SID in the certificate in the new OID that's different from the user SID. And and definitely would need to be concerned about that, because then you have users that are getting certificates that are supposed to go to other users. So that said, I'm going to pause for a second. So I did not, I saw a couple of questions come in, but then they disappeared in my view. So I wanted to make sure that I could see what they were. So let me go in and look. Josh, what do we got in terms of questions?
Yeah, so let me just go ahead and share some of the ones that we have here. We have, I'm just going to start kind of from the top and go down. We have a question, where can we get updates on Microsoft's, ooh, that disappeared.
I know, it's weird, these questions are moving.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm going to go, let's see. And they're getting put into another bucket here. Okay, let's see. So under Q&A, under published, let's see. I'm going to start with the oldest one, which I already answered. So that one doesn't need to be answered. Blah, blah, blah. Where can we get updates on Microsoft's plan for ADCS? It's very outdated.
So I'm going to give you a very unpopular answer, potentially. As somebody who used to work there for 21 years, towards the end of my employment, I was asking the same question, and that question went to a null silence void. The fact of the matter is they don't tell their employees that. I think the reality of that situation is that it's a, we know that they are selling Azure. They're selling Azure. On-prem Windows Server is not getting the love that that it probably should for the amount of adoption that it has, the amount of people that that are required to use it and leverage it and utilize it. The amount of functionality that's been added to the CA in the last 7 years is not that big. There's a lot of things that are coming down the pipe that are going to need to be addressed, and we just don't get an answer from. So I think the unpopular answer is we don't know. I think a lot of folks are compelled to start looking at other things and looking at other avenues for their certificate issuance. It's still very important that we have a lot of organizations have a means to issue their own certificates or handle their own keys. I know that there are some organizations that either they've got a compliance or legislative requirement to be able to handle their own keys, or at least have their keys in their in their control. And there's just no answer to some of this stuff in the cloud, right? You can talk all you want about FIPS 140 level 2 or 142 level 2 or level 3 or all this other stuff. The fact of the matter is that you're taking somebody's word for it. And so there are some things that are not, that either the standards are going to have to standards for an organization or for or that are the legislative or attestation requirements that are being laid down on other places are going to need to adapt with the environments in order to accommodate the fact that everybody else is going to be using computers that nobody really knows who the owner is, right? So I wish I could give you a better answer, but I can tell you that I don't think there is an answer. I think it's a hurry up and wait, which is kind of a really uneasy place to be.
Hey, Sean, can you repeat what breaks in April?
Yeah, so and I'll move back that slide real quick. So in April 2023, disabled mode for strong certificate binding enforcement will go away. It will not be an option. It'll be set up to where if you are using this, the do nothing won't work. You'll have to account for it, or you're gonna have to do something about it. Once we get to November, it's going to be set up to where the strong binding enforcement is set to 2 permanently.
Okay, so I have another question here. It says, so I have identified previously most of my certificates that have the new OID field. Is there a way to confirm before setting domain controllers to strong mapping that our certificates are correct and have the AD supplied subject information? Yeah,
so so I think the biggest thing to do is check for those events. If you are, if you go and you get a sample of your, you get a cross section of your environment for a certain amount of time, whether it's a week, 2 weeks, whatever is a good sample, and you're clear of all those events, then you're probably going to be in pretty good shape. If you're getting flooded by those events, then there's probably something wrong, and you have to go through and identify whether or not that's something that is going to be an issue. Now, in the absence of having that OID in the SID field, you can still set up the mappings, right? You can still set up your alt security identities attribute to do strong mapping. It's just that may be a potentially arduous task because you're entering information into the user account that has to be derived. So you'd have to be able to dump out the certificates that have been issued, get their serial numbers, and then populate that attribute and do that programmatic. It'd be a fairly heavy PowerShell script to do. I would not be surprised to see if there's one already out there that does that. It probably should have been a to-do for me, was to check to see if there was a script out there that already did it. That is probably the most recommended way around it.
Okay, so I've got a little bit of a longer question here. Do you have something up, a screen up, where I can drop a question for you? Because it's a long read.
Sure.
What do you have Teams, or do you want to do the chat in webinar? Okay, I'm going to post this. I'm going to post this back into the chat in the webinar.
Okay.
So don't the people that are moving the questions around, leave this one here for a sec. Thanks. And it says, my company recently did a Bloodhound security assessment. One of the PKI vulnerabilities was for Active Directory Certificate Service Privilege Escalation, or ESC9. We have 9 templates flagged. All of these templates allow for manually supplying subject name in the request. This is necessary for custom web certificates, which don't get directly mapped to a user or computer account. I noticed these templates do not get the new OID extension for strong mapping. Will these type of custom certificates be impacted when enforcement is enabled in November 2023?
So the short answer is no. It's probably more accurately a depends, but to be all the way fair. So if you're setting that template to have it to where you are specifying the subject name. So first of all, anytime that you set it up to where Active Directory does not populate that, to where you are allowing that subject name to be populated by somebody else. The recommendation is that you want to make sure that you have certificate, some sort of an approver, whether it's a certificate manager approver or whether you're doing a certificate request agent. So that's one of those things that I know that PKI Spotlight flags that as a problem, right? That if you have subject supplied in the request, plus not having the certificate manager approval or having a request agent, we actually flag that as a best practice that is not being followed. Most of the time you have that, those are for web servers, and most of the time you have it for web servers, you're not applying it to the machine name because you're, in most circumstances, you're going to want to obfuscate the machine name, and you're using some sort of an alias, right? So because it's not tied to a user account in Active Directory, it really doesn't, it really doesn't apply to anything. It's more, plus, like this is more for end user accounts rather than the servers. It's really so end user accounts can't spoof certificates that were issued to computers or servers. It's one of the main reasons why this vulnerability was pulled away. The other thing that is big on that is that your enhanced key usage for your web server accounts is typically going to be server authentication, and really, the biggest impact here is for client authentication, like for the end users. So the OID is not going to show up in those. Very good question.
Okay, so I'll find you another question here, and at the same time, we need to be aware that we've got a little bit more to go into. We've got another couple polls, but we're going to get to as many of these questions as we possibly can, in the time remaining. We're going to answer all the questions, and we'll answer the questions and publish them so the answers are accessible to everybody in the webinar. But a lot of these questions are so far over my head that I don't even understand what they're asking. So I'm going to ask you one here, and you can tell me what you think of it. How do you turn off inclusion of the 1.3.6.1.4.1.311.25.2 in issued certificates? What is the flag? Is it on the template or the CA? Does it get set as soon as you patch the CA server with the May 2022 update? Right.
So as soon as you patch that CA server, it's going to include it on templates that have the user authentication. To turn it off, you have to flip the, there's an attribute on the certificate template, which is an Active Directory. It's MS-PKI enrollment flag, and it's 0 by 8 and then 40. So I'm actually going to type that into the chat just so I have clarification, because on the slide it's missing a 0. You can verify that.
We'll Photoshop it in later.
Right. So you go through and you set or unset that flag based on whether you want it or not. And it would be, you could actually use certutil.exe to do it. It's certutil ds template is the switch. That's a hidden switch. So I would put in, certutil minus ds template minus question mark to figure out how it worked a little bit better. There is an example in the knowledge base article itself on how to do that to, like an old version 1 template, for instance, to, flip that on or off depending on whether or not you wanted that inclusion.
Okay, that's great. So I have another one here. In a domain where devices are issued machine certificates from a domain-aware MSCA, where the OU is built into the certificate subject, what is the expected behavior of that machine is then moved out, if that machine is then moved out of the OU? I'm worried that it will no longer be authenticated to the domain.
So the subject name goes into the OU. So there's a lot to unpack there. So the first thing is, the subject name is built on the actual location in the directory, right? So what, so you step back. What is the mechanism that would require that to be the same, right? Is there something, is there something that is going through and checking that in order to achieve that level of validation? That's the first question, right? If it's, if it was a user account that was authenticating, then you could actually do a serial name mapping to get around that, right? You wouldn't necessarily have to have that subject name match because it's a computer account. It really depends on what is doing the adjudication of that certificate, right? What's the purpose? If it was something like IPsec doesn't check subject name. Period. It just is the certificate trusted. It is. All right, cool. Use it. Right. There are some use cases that they'll look at the subject name, and if it's wrong, then they'll follow the subject alternative name. That's kind of the downside to there being, if you're going through and you're trying to assess a certificate on whether or not it's good or not, there's probably 200 different outcomes potentially based on how you make that API call, right? Whether or not you're fetching all the certificates in there, whether or not you're matching, entries in the subject name or the subject alternative name, or whether or not you're enforcing, critical extensions, and there's a million different things that can change the way that a certificate is processed. If there's something that's holding true to that computer account living where the subject name actually lives, then yeah, it's going to check through it. Most use cases, though, it's not going to care. Not going to care. Which is, it could potentially be a false trail, right? You could be doing something where you think you're locking it down and you're really not.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let me see if I can scroll through here and find another one. We're limited in time, and I just want to make sure that we're getting some of these answered. We have here's one. Is this OID unique? Are there other OIDs that should be added to other types of certificates? Is there a document that can be referenced?
So OIDs are registered with IANA. So it's unique. Other OIDs, it really depends on the enforcement mechanism, right? Because they added in an enforcement mechanism for this TLS mutual authentication, then it's going to check this OID. Like TLS for the most part, like the way that it's conceptually used hasn't changed in 30 years, right? So most things are not going to change the way that they act based on that OID.
Okay.
Including this review.
Thank you. We've got about 2 more minutes left to answer these questions, and we need to move on. So yeah, we're going to scroll through and let's see. I'm looking for one more. So here's one. Is it certificates used in mutual TLS only, or any certificates used for authentication altogether, aka client authentication certificates? Because the enforcement mechanisms S channel would be anything that would be leveraging S channel. So that is the most common use cases, the TLS with mutual authentication. Okay. All right. So now's the time. I think we can move on from here. What's your next slide there, Sean? It's poll 3. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put this live. I am going to read this topic before I put it live. What topics would you like to discuss further as time remains during this webinar? And then we're just going to endure some awkward silence here as people vote. I'd sing, but we would never get any of you back. So we've got 100% of our votes right now. Okay, so now they're starting to trickle in. We've got an even spread between 3. Ooh, okay, so hardening administration of PKI is leading at 36% of the votes.
Okay.
Right now.
That's really interesting that that's leading.
Yeah, 36% of the votes are let's talk more about hardening administration of PKI.
Okay, cool.
A very close second at 30% is migrating CAs to the cloud.
Ooh.
So I'm going to just go ahead and let you run with that. By far, okay. Hardening administration is leading.
All right, so that leads in quite nicely to really next month's conversation, but we'll talk about it a little bit in preview now. So as you may see over here, I've got my MacGuffin, which is really just a light switch cover. Because the light switch looks awkward. Next month, we're going to be doing Guardians of Crypto Dependency as our topic. We're going to do a Guardians of Galaxy theme. Growing out my facial hair so I look like Peter Quill. And we're going to be talking about our hardened administration offering, which will be released next month. And really, it's just a bunch of techniques that are going to be married together to provide a means for doing administration on PKI servers and crypto dependency servers, really, that make it to where you have to have physical access to things. You have to have things that the attackers are not going to have in order to perform administrative tasks for your critical server arrays for PKI. So some of these methods. Some of these methods include, we have ACL isolation, where there's a combination of allows and explicit denies that shut out the contexts that attackers normally go after, and allow in only the people that the context that you want to have allowed in. There's isolation, certificate-based isolation using IPsec. Some VPN magic that you can perform to introduce things like temporal key fobs, or even cloud-based multi-factor. There's a lot. It's just a bunch of different defense in depth techniques that are married together to provide a way to really safely administer your servers and any dependencies that servers may have. So that's going to be our next month's topic. It's something I'm definitely passionate about because, we want to make sure that we have, we want to make sure that these systems, your PKI servers, are just as dangerous from a threat perspective as domain controllers are, just as dangerous as our identity servers are. Our privileged identity vaults, things like that. I mean, you can, there are certain attack vectors where you can just bypass all of that stuff and you can become the master of the kingdom, basically attacking a system that doesn't get the attention that these other systems do. So we're going to bring attention to that. We're going to bring attention to the fact that these are systems that can be exploited. Our last webinar, we showed how you can elevate all the way to the top using a CA as a normal user. It's an attack that we've seen the advanced attackers, the nation state funded attackers, the organized crime funded attackers use. It's now part of their playbooks, so we know that that's something that they're doing. And the best way to get them away from that is make it less attractive and make it a lot harder. Make it to where they move on. Make it to where they go to the next thing in their playbook. Because they're going to have a list of 5,000 things to go after. You want them to just casually move on to the next thing after they get to the CAs, right? Because the CAs are very, very. It's an easy button if you get in. So there's just so many things that you can do, and so many things that apply to not only PKI servers. That if you go through and you apply these principles to other systems, it can be something that's agnostic to technology, and really a lot of these principles are agnostic to OS as well, right? So definitely something I'm passionate about.
So we're still open for what topics would you like to discuss further as time remains. And 36% of you said hardening administration of PKI, 30% said migrating CAs to the cloud. So if you have questions regarding these two, drop them into chat and we'll get them answered. I have people back in the wings looking to answer. So go ahead, Sean. Sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah. So I also wanted to see if there was any other questions that are just sitting there in the queue. So is the disabled mode removed using Windows Update, or is it already counting down? So disabled mode is basically, what it's set to now, if you have the update. And if you were to go and remove the update, which I think the way that the updates work is that, so that's a really good question. I'm gonna have to probably answer that one. I'm gonna have to give one a little bit of thought about removing, because I've not really thought about removing the update, like what the repercussions of that would be. Especially the way that the update channels work. I don't know if that would accumulate, or if there would be something that would be applied over the top of it that would just, it would just ignore the fact that you removed it because you had something that applied over the top of it. Like a later update basically overriding that update. Would have to check to see. Very good question.
Okay, guys, and this is the type of question that I love, because behind the scenes, I kind of love it when people ask questions that try to stump Sean. So I'm getting vast amounts of entertainment here. So Sean will get to this one. And if you have any other especially challenging questions, send them our way. It's called Stump the Sean Day.
So any day that ends the letter Y is typically that day, because I am stumped a lot. But
okay. So any more questions on the poll question that said how we wanted to spend the rest of the time, which is hardening administration of PKI, migrating CAs to the cloud? Either of those questions. If you have them, drop them in. We do have people in the wings that are looking for questions related to these two to publish them. If we see them, we'll answer them.
Yeah. So the fourth poll question, and then I think after that, I mean, so after the fourth poll question, we have the hey, contact Carolyn. If
yep. So I'm posting this real quick. This is kind of our, we'd love to know, this is obviously something we want to provide for the greater good of the PKI industry, keeping everybody informed, and really we're trying really hard to be there for questions in the industry. We want to make ourselves that destination for answering your questions. And we don't want it to be only self-serving, selling our services and our products. It goes deeper than that. There's an educational component too. However, we do want to know this question. Had you ever heard of PKI Solutions or PKI Spotlight before today? And then answer these questions if you could for us. And feel free to reach out. We're not going to try to sell you something you don't need. We really want to help you. We want to help your bottom line, and we want to really help you look good to anybody you answer to. That's the end goal with this question. Help us help you look really good.
Yeah. I mean, that's the big thing. Oh, and I mean, you know me, Josh, and I say it all the time. Like, I'm a firm believer that, no matter where you are in your threat model, certain like certificates, PKI can provide an answer. It might not be the answer, but it is an answer, right? Whether it's, trying to solve issues with, trying to get and aim towards zero trust. You can't get zero trust without, you just can't. If you're trying to, combat data exfiltration, you're trying to make sure that you're, you're combating, things like insider threats and data risk and things like that. PKI has an answer for every component along the way. It might not be the answer, but it is an answer. And so if you've got something that has an answer to every single piece of the threat model, what's protecting the thing that's issuing out those answers, right? And that's what we do, and that's what we want to make sure that we're, because it's one thing to protect the keys of the kingdom, it's another thing to protect the person that's issuing, the entity that's issuing the keys to the kingdom, and that's what we like to do. We want to make sure that that entity is protected and hardened and set up for best practices and efficient and set up for the future. And we want to put people in a situation where 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, they're not redoing everything because they were put in a bad spot.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So this is, give us a ring. The screen that's on the slide that's on your screen is starting to sum up this webinar. Reach out if you have questions. Reach out. You don't necessarily. This is the next webinar, Guardians of Crypto Dependency. That'll be March 15th, 2023. Yep. You've got your presenters there, and we'll send you better information on this here soon. This will be, I would start looking for information on this webinar by, I would say, this weekend. We should it's going to be pretty soon. We're framing it out. We're framing it out right now. I've got August on board. We're going to be dressing up, so that's going to be fun. And it's going to be something else. We're going to be kind of outside of our comfort zone. We're going to talk about a lot of things we don't normally talk about. Things like, like VPN hardware devices. We're going to be talking about IPsec. We're going to be talking about, some various hardening techniques, multi-factor, different types of multi-factor authentication, things like that. So it's going to be way outside of our comfort zone, but it's all going to lead towards, the end goal, which is, protecting the protector. Great. Thanks again for summing that up. And watch your inboxes and LinkedIn. I want to reiterate that we want to send you a coffee mug or a water thing. We want to. We have them by the door. They're packed. They're in these great little beautiful boxes. The only thing they're missing is your name. Yep. So please go to LinkedIn. You don't have any obligation to buy anything. No, not at all. Not at all. We're going to just send this to you, and then we'll announce, the winners, unless you ask us not to. So go to LinkedIn and answer the poll. You've already attended this. We'll bump those lists up to each other and do Wheel of Fortune to choose 3 randomly. Going forward, just as a heads up, we're going to need you to be following us on LinkedIn, following our page, and subscribe to our YouTube in order to win this swag. It's just it's a way for us to really start to expand our foundation of who we can reach with these educational endeavors. So without that, I don't really have much to add. Do you have anything more to add there, Sean? No, I'm looking forward to next. I'm really looking forward to next month. August and I have already gotten started on. So we've been started, but we're really moving on the content, and it's going to be really cool. It really kind of represents a new frontier for us. It's going to be one of those things that things can really go a very long way. So it's a way to harvest quick wins as well as set yourself nicely for the future. Great, thank you so much. And then I think we're wrapping up here. We're right at 11:30, and and we've used the time that we have. So again, thank you guys so much from Sean and I and all of the PKI Solutions team.